All right, let's get started. So, first of all, welcome everyone. This is a session, a breakout that is really primarily focused on the Vice President of Administration role. Some chapters call it the EVP or Vice President of Performance, something like that. Whatever position is sort of second in command underneath the president in your chapter, that's really who this session is geared towards. So, allowed me to introduce myself. My name is David Greenberg, and I serve as the Northern Atlantic Regional Director. So I oversee AKSI for half of upstate New York, all of New England, as well as the United Kingdom. So I get to oversee part of the international branch of AKSI, which is really cool. I mean, we're actually doing a lot of expansion there in the next few years. So there's a lot of cool opportunities there, especially if you're studying abroad there. There's going to be a ambassador program going on over the next few years where you can get scholarships to study abroad in the UK through AKSI. So I figured I'd just put in a little plug for that since that's my program. But really, today is about talking about the different roles that the VPA has. And the first role that the VPA has, or EVP, or whatever you call it in your chapter, has in most chapters is committees. And before we go into it, I do want to emphasize that this is really more of a discussion than a presentation. So at any point, I'll ask for questions, I'll ask for comments and discussion, and so don't be afraid or don't hesitate to jump on in as I go through this presentation. Don't wait till the end, because then I'll be really boring. I like to have a more interactive presentation. So first of all, when you are selecting committees, you have to decide, first of all, what committees you're going to have in your chapter. And from year to year, you can adjust that based on your chapter's needs. And one of the things we'll discuss in a moment is we'll discuss what different committees your chapter has, because you might find some cool ideas that other chapters have that your chapter might want to add for this upcoming year. But when you're selecting committees, the first thing you have to do is you have to select a committee chair or committee chairs if you want to do co-chairs, which is always a possibility. And when you're doing this, you really want to consider these three things on the screen. You want to consider the fact that committees are an opportunity for growth and development, especially for the committee chairs. You want to consider people's skills, sets, and interests. You want to consider their potential as well as already proven abilities. Now, my personal advice for committee chairs is a lot of people tend to give committee chairs to the person who has the best ideas or the biggest ideas. And I actually often caution against that. What I usually recommend is to give it to the person who's the best leader. Certainly the person with the best ideas should be on that committee. So if someone has a lot of great service ideas, right, and they're really passionate about service, they should definitely be on the service committee, no doubt. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the best chair for the committee if they're not the best leader. What you want really is someone who knows how to delegate, someone who's going to get the entire committee involved and really give people agency in the committee and autonomy to actually do work and to learn and grow. That's who makes the best committee head. If you can find that person who is still passionate, they're going to bring the ideas out of the committee members, and they're going to make those committee members responsible for those events that they have ideas for. And everyone on the committee is going to be able to grow and develop as a result of that kind of process, as opposed to the situation that you see a lot in chapters all over the place in the fraternity, where the committee head's the one doing all the work and the rest of the committee is sort of just there, not really doing much. It's a very common problem to have. So if you're seeing that in your chapter, know that you're not alone. But one solution to that is to try to adjust how you select your committee heads if you haven't already done that for this upcoming semester. If you already have done this for this upcoming semester, you can still keep this advice in mind for the spring semester. So before we go on to the next slide, I'm curious, what thoughts do we have about what I just said? What committees do you guys have? What questions do you guys have? I want to open up to anything you guys are thinking right now.
Um, I'll start. My name is Sydney Braddock. I'm the EVP for the Omega Z chapter at Florida A&M University. We have 13 committees. Our biggest ones are probably professional development, activities, fundraising, those things. But our chapter is getting small. So one thing that I'm gonna talk to our like e-board about is what committees. I think we're gonna have some one-person committees or not at all. So we're trying to figure out which ones to have, like which ones are the most important and which ones not so much for this semester. So that's our big concern for now.
Sure. And are there any committees that you potentially condense and bring together into one bigger committee as well? Would be the other possibility.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we're gonna have to do.
Yeah, and that happens from time to time with chapters. As chapters grow and shrink, that's a natural process to do, and that's one of the things that I think is probably more difficult to get rid of committees than add committees. Certainly, um, but yeah, that's absolutely within sort of this role's position to do. So if you see your chapter shrinking, that is one good idea to do, is actually to condense committees. Anyone else have any like unique committees? Like, does anyone else have like a consulting committee, for example?
Oh. Hi, my name is Michaela Banfo. I'm the EVP for the Omega Kappa chapter at Towson University. Right now for our committees, we have like a rush committee professional. We have this thing called PIC, so that's like committee heads for like the pledging process. So like for like fundraising and like the stuff that pledges have to do during the pledging process, they would have like a brother that kind of like oversees them and helps in any sense. We have a marketing committee, fundraising, alumni relations, community service, and our VPM, which would be our membership, vice president of membership. But one unique thing that we do is that we have a rush committee. So for the week of rush, we have that committee, and then it like merges into our marketing committee, if that makes sense. But that's like the unique thing of our chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Rush is sort of its own beast.
Yeah.
Just a small thing, though. We are actually trying to move away from the word rush per se and move towards the word recruitment. I know it's a small difference, but it is sort of the nomenclature that we're trying to use on the fraternity level. So you might want to rename it like recruitment committee or something along those lines. Small change, but it would just be aligned with what we're doing on the fraternity level. Anyone else want to comment on any committees that they have that they think are unique or interesting that they want to share?
Hi, I'm Jordan Jekyll. I'm from the Phi Omega chapter at Gonzaga University. And one committee that we added a couple years ago is diversity and inclusion. And it's one that we're kind of still expanding as we go, but diversity and inclusion, they'll have representatives set in when we're doing bids or a selection of bigs and littles. And they also just kind of help and do different events for the chapter related to professionalism and diversity in the workplace. And it's been a really cool committee to see expand.
That's an excellent committee to have. And especially nowadays, I think that chapters that have the size to do it really should consider doing that kind of committee. So I think that's an excellent idea. So thank you for sharing that one. Anyone else want to share? All right, well, we'll keep move on, and hopefully more people will share as we go through. So a little bit more on committee chairs. Committee chairs are responsible for facilitating the committee meetings, distributing and delegating tasks, ensuring that those tasks are then completed, remaining an active leader, providing action plans, and planning for events themselves, right? And the key is that planning for events themselves is the last bullet here. Oftentimes, it's sort of like the only bullet that the committee head really focuses on. And you really want to make sure that they are focusing on all of these and really doing the full job of a committee head. And really the VPA's role is to almost be kind of a advisor or a coach to the committee heads. At least for most chapters, that's how the VPA functions or the EVP functions. And so if you have a committee chair, for example, mid-semester, who is doing everything themselves, and they have a committee that is capable and is willing to do stuff, that's where you really want to step in and coach them and get them to start really facilitating community meetings, delegating tasks, being an active leader rather than just doing it all themselves, because doing everything yourself is not really leadership. Working with others and getting a task completed together, that is leadership, right? So any thoughts or questions on this before we move on past committees? Going once, going twice, sold to no one. All right. So beyond committees, one of the other main roles that the VPA or EVP has in most chapters is the chapter calendar. You want to make sure that you update the chapter calendar before the year begins. So your chapter success plan actually is due, your final version is due this Saturday, August 15th. So your chapter calendar is one of the things that you include on your chapter success plan. So as of right now, you should have at least a basic elementary calendar done and ready to go for this semester. You might not have every single event on there, but you want to at least have a pretty good idea of what you're doing this semester at this point. And if not, you certainly want to get that together ASAP. Again, by planning events in advance and utilizing the chapter success plan, you're going to be better prepared for the semester, and things are just going to go much more smoothly for you and your chapter, right? And you're just going to be able to have a better experience for all of your brothers in general. And then besides just uploading it to the chapter success plan, make sure that you also share it with your chapter brothers so that they can begin to plan in advance, right? So they should know, for example, what day of the week chapter meetings are on if they change from semester to semester. Most chapters do it the same from semester to semester, but if you do change, everyone should know what day and time it is, right? Any major events that you guys are planning, people should know about already at this point. So you're not letting people know last minute about everything, because then they might not be able to attend, right? So any thoughts, questions, concerns on chapter calendar? Does anyone have any like really cool events that they're planning for this semester that they want to talk about or share? One of the things that we're actually encouraging, at least I'm encouraging in my region personally, is for chapters to share events. So actually the Chi Eta chapter at Queen Mary University of London is doing an event on digital identity this Saturday, which is going to be really cool. They're sharing with all brothers. You can find on Facebook, and I can put the link in the chat in a little bit if you guys want and are interested. So are there any cool events that you guys are doing that you might want to share with other chapters that you guys could think of off the top of your head that are on your calendar? Maybe not.
Hello.
Oh, hey.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. So hi, my name is Bree. I'm a member of the Ramapo College Chi Upsilon chapter. So it's not a particular event, but it's I guess, series of events I'm considering bringing to our e-board. And it's basically more since everything is virtual and we won't be meeting in person. I plan on proposing to my brothers that we set up basically meetings with other chapters so we can meet with them over Zoom. So I think that would be good, especially because my chapter is kind of hard to plan events between chapters when we were in person. So I'm thinking that now that we're virtual, having weekly or bi-weekly meetings with different chapters would help us kind of just expand and get to know each other more.
I think that's an awesome idea to do. So I'm really glad they shared that. And you said that you were from Ramapo?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so you are in Atlantic Metro, which means Diana is your regional director.
Yeah.
And she's fantastic. So I would also bring this idea to her because I think she's going to love it. And she could definitely help connect you with the other chapters in your region as well.
Awesome. I'll definitely do that.
Yeah. But she'll love to hear that idea, I think. So very cool. Anyone else have any other ideas? That was a really cool one to share. Sharing is caring. It can be fun.
Oh, hi, me again. We have so like for our chapter for Omega Kappa, we have like an inter-chapter liaison. So like they're trying to utilize social media to create a game. So like that could be for like other chapters around our area or like whoever follows us on our social media, and like we want to give like a prize, so maybe like donating to their community service. So that could be to their philanthropy or something. So it'll be like a series of like games, like maybe like bingo or something, or like do a TikTok challenge and post it onto your story. So that's our idea that we were planning to do for this semester.
Very cool. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of cool creative things you could do virtually. So even if you aren't doing anything in person, there's a lot of creative ideas, like using social media, for example, like you just mentioned, to do different challenges and do different games, right? But there's so many different ways to keep people engaged, even if you're not meeting in person. And this is really the time to be creative and do things along those lines. We got time for another person to share if anyone wants to. All right. So going back to committees, because this PowerPoint is set up in a sort of weird way. Some questions to keep in mind. How does your chapter currently structure committees? Is everyone participating? Does everyone feel included? And are people actually completing their tasks? So you don't have to necessarily answer this to everyone, but at least answer it to yourself. Take a moment to think about these questions and really evaluate your chapter for a second in your head, right? Because if the answer for these last three questions is no for any of them, then that's something that you as VPA want to work on for your chapter, right? Is everyone participating? If not everyone's participating, then you want to figure out how do you get everyone engaged? How do you get everyone to have something to do in the chapter? I imagine as a student brother, I was very involved in AKSI. I had a position every single semester. I was just gung-ho AKSI. And I imagine many of you are the same. But I imagine for those people who aren't gung-ho AKSI and don't have a position, AKSI would be kind of boring if you didn't like plan anything or do anything, right? Like if you're just sort of the recipient of things, I imagine it'd be relatively boring. So you want to figure out what are people's passions, what are people interested in, how can they contribute to the chapter? Because everyone has something they can contribute, right? We all come with different backgrounds, different skills, different interests, and everyone has something that they could bring. One of your roles as VPA or EVP is to bring that out of each brother individually and figure out how can they contribute, how can they feel part of the organization. And then completing their tasks, that's really on the committee chairs to make sure that people are completing their tasks. And if people aren't completing their tasks on certain committees, that's where you want to coach that committee chair. So another thing to think about as well is funding chapter events. This kind of falls under VPA a little bit and also under VPF or treasurer a little bit. But the idea is that there's multiple different ways that you can fund events. So one is through membership, donations, and or dues. It's a basic source of funds, and it's the least risky method because your members are directly paying for the events. The problem is that you don't want to charge people too much, especially nowadays with COVID going on. The fraternity as a whole is going to be decreasing dues by 10%. I would recommend also decreasing the chapter level dues as well. So as you know, usually $60 goes to the Heritage Center from dues and the rest stays with the chapter. It's going to be less than that going to the Heritage Center, and I would also recommend that you collect less for the chapter individually as well, just to reduce the burden on people, because there's a lot of people that are really struggling right now, with the unemployment and everything that's going on with COVID. So usually this is the least risky method, but you really don't want to burden your chapter members too much, especially this year of all years. Foundations and grants are another source that you can look at. These generally only fund new projects for traditional community groups and rarely fund for sort of basic operating expenses. And the timeline between application and awards can be quite long. And the politics can also increase the difficulty of getting the award. However, if you can get a grant, it's an excellent way of funding things, especially if you have a new initiative like a consulting group or a new investment group or things along those lines, or you're doing some sort of big project that the university is going to benefit from. That's where you want to look at those kinds of potential sources from the universities or other organizations. You also look at contributions from outside vested interests, merchants, parents, alumni, etc. Alumni have money, so don't be afraid to ask for it. Parents may or may not have money, depending on the situation right now. Merchants definitely will be looking to partner with organizations because right now merchants and businesses are struggling with COVID. And so different partnerships that you can make with local businesses are an excellent idea right now. So for example, if you do have in-person events, you might be able to do some sort of, deal with like a local restaurant, something like that. Or you might be able to do, a merchandising deal or something like that. So look out for things along those lines. There are also mutual benefit projects. So donors with no direct link to the organization receive a service for their money. So for example, you can do a service like consulting. If you're a consulting group, you can do that, not pro bono, but you could actually do it for a fee. If you guys are experienced enough in consulting, you could work on advertising for them. You could even do sales of products, for example. And also some companies will provide matching funds. So if you do have alumni donating, for example, ask if their companies do matching donations always. Any quick questions on funding chapter events?
Me again, I have a question. So for basically with the merchants, like has anyone like personally within their chapter done that before? And if so, can you like explain how you went about that process? Because that will be something new for the Omega Kappa chapter.
Anyone want to speak to that? I can speak to that a little bit, but I want to open it up to any students who want to talk about it. All right, well, if no one wants to speak to it, I can speak to it a little bit. So in terms of partnering with a merchant, one example I could think of is we had a semi-formal when I was a student where I was not the one planning this, so I can't speak to it very directly, but I know about it indirectly because a good friend of mine was planning it from the chapter, where she went to a couple different restaurants around there and basically said like, hey, here's how many people we expect to be attending this event. If you provide food for free or for a discounted price, then we'll also like hand out marketing flyers for your business and something like that. I think that was the deal, is that they had the marketing flyers because that was like with the food was like all the marketing flyers for their business and everything, their menu and everything. And I think we actually got free food from one place and like half off from another place. So I think our pizza was half off, and our we got like insomnia cookies. I don't know if you have that by your campus, but we got insomnia cookies for free, I think, for semi-formal 1 year. So even things like that, it's not direct funding, but saves you money. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to do the mutual benefit projects with merchants, sort of combining those two. And so a lot of times you do fundraising events with merchants where you'll market their business for a certain day and they will give you a certain percentage of the profits. So for example, I know like a lot of chains do that, like Panda Express, Muya, I think Insomnia Cookies does this. A lot of popular college food chains, if you have any of those around you, tend to do those. So those would be things to look into as well, and you could earn a decent amount of money from those potentially with relatively little effort. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And also, have any other questions on funding? Okay. So another thing I want to go over just briefly is parliamentary procedure. And the reason why it's important to know parliamentary procedure is just because in the absence of the president, for whatever reason, the VPA or the EVP becomes the president of the chapter essentially temporarily, right? Just sort of like in the actual federal government, right? That's the sort of the role of a VP. And so if the president can't make a meeting for whatever reason, right, let's say they're sick or they have some other commitment for that night, that's where you then take over a meeting. So you have to really know parliamentary procedure fairly well. So a couple things just to know off the top of your head is that chapters can create standing rules, and you can also roll those into your bylaws. Using parliamentary procedure increases meeting efficiency, which is why you want to use it. In order to officially have a meeting, you need to have quorum, 50% plus one of your chapter, a presiding officer, which again could be you if the president is not there, and a secretary is needed. If you have those three things, then you can hold a meeting officially. So you actually don't need a president, you just need a presiding officer, which again, you can be. And generally recommend that any debates or conversations should follow a pro-con-pro format. Generally, we find that that increases efficiency for discussions. And there's actually a whole parliamentary procedure guide that's actually in the knowledge base that we'll refer you to when we get to the resources in a few slides. They can go over and really know parliamentary procedure like the back of your hand. So I would recommend taking some time before the semester starts to just go over that at least for a little bit and know parliamentary procedure. So before I go on to the next slide, does anyone else have any quick questions on parliamentary procedure things or anything with meetings generally? This one's fairly basic. Nope. Okay. Then another thing we want to go over is suspensions and reinstatement terms, because a lot of chapters either don't do this correctly or get confused about how to do this correctly. So something that we want to go over and make sure that you guys understand. So there are two types of suspensions that a chapter can give out itself. All right, non-attendance suspensions and financial suspensions. The third type of suspensions, which is disciplinary, is actually not done at the chapter level. It is actually done at the fraternal level, right? And so if you have to do a disciplinary hearing where you are going to have to potentially suspend a member for something, that's where you need to reach out to your regional director and your CERC, as well as your chapter advisor, of course. But it really needs to be elevated to the highest level, which is your regional director at that point, if you're dealing with a disciplinary suspension potentially, because they can help you with that at that point and guide you through that process if it becomes necessary. Hopefully it never will for your chapter. What is a little bit more common is non-attendance and financial suspensions, and that's why we allow that to be done at the chapter level, is because that happens, unfortunately, somewhat regularly with members in different chapters. So for non-attendance, to be suspended, it is 3 unexcused absences per semester, or 2 per quarter if you are a quarter school. We have a few of those on the West Coast, primarily. We recommend reinstatement terms that include things along the lines of community service hours, which we would limit like 2 to 5 hours. A meeting with the executive board to discuss attendance and why it's important. Presenting to the chapter about why it's important to attend chapter. Creating personal goals that may involve, attending AKSI events, not necessarily the chapter itself, but attending events and whatnot. The idea is that you want to get them more involved and bring them back into the chapter. We are saying that there are not going to be fines or fees for non-attendance because ultimately that really does not help bring someone back into the chapter. It's just penalizing them for whatever's going on in their life that led them to not be going to a chapter's events, right? And this should not include mandatory attendance at closed chapter events. So the reinstatement terms, that is, should not include mandatory events at closed chapter events. It should not include future attendance, or 100% attendance. So you can ask them to create personal goals about attendance, but you can't mandate 100% attendance in the future. Should not include a chapter or e-board vote. This is done at the time of suspension. And when they are suspended, they get an automatic reinstatement and a clean slate. So once you are reinstated, it's as if you've not missed any events that semester or that quarter. Does anyone have any questions on non-attendance before I go over financial? Is that all clear? Non-attendance. Okay. For financial, it's actually a little bit more simple. To be suspended, as long as you are 30 days past due, you get suspended for financial suspension, financial delinquency, that is. So if your chapter dues are due, let's say October 1st, then October 31st, if someone hasn't paid, they are suspended. Reinstatement terms should always be just to pay the amount that they owe with no extra fines or fees. Usually if someone's not paying dues, it's because they don't have much money. And so to assess extra fines or fees is, to be frank, fairly classist, because a lot of people can't afford those extra fines or fees. So if you're doing extra fines or fees on top of what they already owe, really all you're doing is making it less likely that they're going to rejoin the fraternity and more likely that they're just going to resign, which is not what we want. We want them to come back and be part of our brotherhood. And again, once they repay the amount that they owe, they get automatic reinstatement and they get a clean slate. So you don't count any events that they missed, for example, while they were suspended, against them for non-attendance, things along those lines. All right. So that's pretty simple. Again, if there's a disciplinary issue, make sure that you immediately alert your chapter advisor, section director, regional director, and your CERC, either Amber or Coral. Right. Those four people should know immediately if there's a disciplinary issue that might need a suspension, and they will help guide you through that process. Again, hopefully that's not necessary. So then our last slide here is just some resources here. And Amber, remind me, will these be emailed out?
Yeah, after the calls, we'll send all these out.
Great. So you're going to have access to all of these resources here. Chapter meeting procedures and parliamentary procedures at a glance. I'd recommend that you guys look that over quickly, as I mentioned before. Operations Avenue is our podcast where we talk about basically how to run a chapter. And there are a few episodes here that might be particularly useful for your role in particular. And there's actually a whole YouTube playlist that we have for Vice President of Administration that you might want to go through when you have a little bit of time over the next few weeks, hopefully. That would be useful for you to look at. So thank you for listening to the presentation. And we have another 5 minutes if you have any questions, comments, concerns, queries, or anything that you guys want to discuss.
Hi, it's Christina Greenberg. So I was just had a quick question could you go back to the suspended for the financial?
Sure.
So one thing that my e-board for UConn is kind of looking at is people requesting LOAs this semester. Sorry, just also to circle back, you said for the Heritage Center that they're going to be collecting less than the normal 60?
Yeah, we're decreasing it by 10%, actually.
By 10%, okay.
The communication will be going on Friday, though, with all the details.
Okay, yeah. So like we're still finalizing like based on that and how many brothers we expect to be active and on campus, even though all our events will be online, whether or not we're like what amount we're gonna do. But with that being said, I know like LOAs are typically based on like bylaws and hardships, and then they kind of have to go through not only e-board but also regional director, I believe, and the chapter advisor. But with like the amount of people who are going to be off campus, I was just kind of curious what the LOA process will look like if different in terms of leniency, because I feel like we are like afraid of a lot of people either A, dropping, or B, just not wanting to pay fees at all with an online semester.
Right. So first of all, I would say encourage people to stay active and encourage people to have a virtual semester and explaining like everything that you guys are going to do, all the different events you guys are going to put together virtually, and sort of encourage people to stay active that way. In terms of LOA, there actually is going to be an LOA COVID scenario for this year. So under extreme hardship, we're going to be adding like a special category for this year. Amber, correct me if I'm wrong here.
So it'll probably just still be an extreme hardship, but that's something that we're talking to the RDs about when they're in the process of approving it. It's not going to be like a separate status, but just, everything going on with COVID, that's going to be something that the RDs will just be told about, and we will be more lenient about that.
Yeah, certainly I can speak for my region, which you're in, Tina, that I definitely will be understanding, and I know the other RDs will be as well. I can probably speak for them here, where we understand what's going on. We understand that, for example, people may have lost their summer employment that they were relying on, or their parents have lost their employment, and they just realistically can't pay dues. That's a realistic situation that a lot of people are going to be in, and that's a reason to be on LOA extreme hardship. If someone is just not on campus and don't feel like it, that's not as much of a reason. Because I know, for example, like UConn, they just decided that out-of-state students who don't have in-person classes won't be on campus this semester. And I think a lot of other campuses will be doing similar things across the country. So certainly if that is the case, you want to encourage those individuals who can still pay dues and can still be active to be active. And you want to make sure they're providing enough value for them that they have the incentive to do so.
Okay, gotcha.
Another thing with that is we're not assessing finance charges this semester. So the due date on the invoice will probably still say October 15th, but if you don't pay it by then for the Heritage Center dues, there's not going to be finance charges associated with not paying that on time. So you can work with your members to get on a payment plan for your chapter so that they don't have to pay everything up front, and they can pay as they go or pay a certain amount each month.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and payment plans can be more flexible than they have in the past for chapters like UConn. I know have already done payment plans in the past. You can be even more flexible now with the due date and the rate of the lack of finance charges. Anyone else have any other questions or concerns for this upcoming year?
I'm not sure what anybody else could do about this. Again, I'm Sydney Braddock, the EVP for the Omega Z chapter at Florida A&M University. I think dues is what everybody's worried about. For us particularly, we're getting really low in our numbers. And so we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do intake. And at the same time, I'm worried that money is definitely going to be one of the driving factors as to why to pay dues, because I know, like, say if it's 60 or maybe like mid 50s, I feel like it's likely that my chapter will just have dues go to nationals and not take any for ourselves. And I guess we're still trying to figure out how to motivate everybody to be active and pay those dues and see how we're going to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that could be, and that's could be the issue with everyone, right? With every chapter, because at the end of the day, brothers are broke college students, right? And I remember being in that same boat not too long ago myself. So in terms of that, yeah, I think that if you need to, it is very reasonable to not collect chapter dues and just collect what you have to pay to the Heritage Center. If that really is necessary to keep your chapter afloat in terms of membership, if you're relatively small, and especially if you have any money like left over from your bank account from past years, this is the year to dip into that if there's ever a time to do that, right? If you have savings, certainly. But that's definitely a discussion that you want to have with your e-board and with your VPF, especially in terms of what's realistic for your chapter And so ultimately, it's a discussion that you want to have openly with your chapter members. And you might want to have a meeting before the semester starts, actually, to discuss this or get people's thoughts on it, and just figure out what's realistic for everyone. And then, as Ember said, we can be flexible with payment plans, so people don't have to pay all up at front, all up at once, because that could be a really big burden on people. And spreading it out a little bit might help people out a little bit. So anything you can do to be flexible, we recommend it, right? Ultimately, we're not trying to exclude people because they can't afford a KSI. That's not what we're about here, and that's definitely be a real concern. Ultimately, though, it's really a matter of, as I said to Tina, showing that the value's there and that you're getting the bang for your buck, and that you're getting more than your money's worth if you do stay on and you do pay dues. And that's really going to be the challenge for every e-board to do. But that's what you got to do ultimately. So any last questions before we finish up? Going once, going twice. Sold. All right. Thank you guys for attending. I appreciate your participation, your questions, your comments. And hopefully this was helpful for you all, and hopefully you all have a successful semester. If you have any future questions, make sure to reach out to your chapter advisor, your section director, your regional director, and of course your CERC, either Coral or Amber. We are all here to help you, so you're not alone. All right, this is just the start of a conversation.